Alright guys, the Sub 4 was announced just a couple of weeks ago, and today we're going to deep dive into the Sub 4 because we haven't had the time to do it since the Arc Ultra was announced at the same time. By the way, Sonos has dropped the Gen from the naming convention, so it is just Sub 4, not Sub Gen 4. Now there's some changes to it which I will take the opportunity to walk through with you guys in depth today. Now, will the Sub 4 destroy the Sub Gen 3?
I don't think so.
Is the Sub 4 better than the Sub Gen 3? Is it possible that the Sub 4 offers nothing over the Sub Gen 3? It is newer, so it must be better.
Possible.
Darling, you have no
Okay.
idea what's possible.
Well, at this point, you might have a Sub Gen 3 and wondering if you need to upgrade to the Sub 4, or if you're running without a sub, is the Sub 4 the one sub that will blow your mind and destroy your world with a blast? So quick upfront summary for you, for those of you who have no time to stay throughout the whole video. If you have no sub, buy the Sub 4. If you can save $200 or more, go for the Sub Gen 3. Now, if you have a smaller room, buy the Sub Mini, consider that. And yes, even if you have an Arc Ultra which already has a sound motion driver inside acting as a micro sub, you will still hear massive improvements in the bass department when it is paired with a sub, any sub for that matter. Now, if you have some time to hang around, I would like to analyze the Sub 4 at 3 levels. Level 1 being a superficial level, level 2 being diving a little bit deeper into the specifications and the restriction, and level 3 going into the core internal design of the Sub 4. Now lastly, I'll walk you through what a Sub 4 can do for your setup using frequency response sweeps to measure the sound differences. That's very objective kind of measurement. I will also be comparing the sound differences between the Sub Gen 3 and the Sub 4. So if you don't have a sub today, get a sub. It will be the best money you can invest into your Sonos setup. Alright, so at first glance, level 1 superficial differences. It all looks roughly similar except for the obvious matte versus glossy finish. The matte finish is only available on the Sub 4, whereas the Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3 of the subs before the Sub 4, they are all glossy finish, with the exception of one special edition matte finish for the Sub Gen 1. Now, if you are in the habit of moving subwoofers around, you might also notice that the new one, the Sub 4, is slightly lighter at 11.79 kg as opposed to the 13.15 kg in the Sub Gen 3. Now, if you are really into moving subwoofers around and you want heavy material, then consider the Sub Gen 2, which I think it was tipping the scales at about 16 kg. So that's one heavy beast for you. So moving from the Sub Gen 2 to the Sub 4 today, it has lost 4 kg in weight. Wow, not too bad. Now, at the level 2, when we are going into the Sub 4 and taking a much deeper look, if you dig deeper into the spec sheet, you'll see a couple of more differences, right? So some of the other channels have already covered this. I'm a little bit late to the game, but to give it all to you in this video, the Sub 4 has more memory. It has double the amount of memory, 512 megabytes as opposed to 256 megabytes. Now, on the Sub Gen 3, the memory is SD-RAM, which is a slightly older type of RAM as compared to the DDR4 on the Sub 4. But that shouldn't matter much to you, right? The CPU has also been upgraded. It was a quad-core system on the Sub Gen 3, which was at 1.5 GHz. The new one is clocked at a quad-core 1.9 GHz, and the Wi-Fi connectivity should be better, and it is now supporting AC and AX standard. But if you're still running 2.4 GHz, no worries, it still works. Now, this changes two things. I would say is compatibility or how you set up the subs. Now, so there are two things, right? Compatibility and dual sub setup. So the first point I'm going to go to is on the compatibility. Now the Sub Gen 4 that I have here, well, that's the box, but my Sub 4 has already been deployed. It was tested with the Arc Ultra, but what else can you connect that with? Now the Sub Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3 was compatible with almost every Sonos speaker ever made, including the Playbar, which was made 11 years ago, as well as the entire IKEA Symphonics range. Well, the Move and the Roam, they didn't support subwoofers, but that's another story, right? Because another design consideration altogether. Those were meant to be portable and battery powered. Then the first generation players and amps were also not supported by any subs to begin with. But even the Play 3, which by now is already like 13 years old, right? It was launched in 2011. They are supported. But the Sub 4 changes things. It doesn't support the play bar and the play base. So for those of you rocking the original play bar and a slightly more updated play base, those won't work. But I think the numbers of you should be relatively small. The play bar, yes, it should be quite in use, but the play base, I don't even know anyone who owns a play base, and I've seen it deployed in a living room anywhere. But more importantly, the Sub 4 no longer works with the Play 1, the Play 3, and the Play 5s, and it doesn't work with the Symphonics Gen 1 bookshelf and the lamps anymore. So those were supported by the Sub Gen 1, Gen 2, and Gen 3, but no more supported by the Sub 4. So for those of you with those setups, then you won't be able to use the Sub 4 with them. Now, the other point I wanted to make when it comes to all these spec changes is that it affects dual sub connectivity. Now, with the Sub Gen 3, dual subs were supported. It was introduced back a couple of years ago. You can pair two subs together as long as at least one of them is a Gen 3. Now, this is still the case for the Arc, the Beam 1, 2, the Ray, the M, Play Bar, Play Bass. As long as you have any of those speakers or home theater product, you will be able to dual pair a Gen 3 sub together with Gen 1, Gen 2, or Gen 3 sub. But with the Arc Ultra, only Sub Gen 3 and Sub 4 can be paired together. Right? Even if you have the Sub 4, you won't be able to pair a Sub Gen 1 or Gen 2 with that. If you are after a single sub setup, then the saving grace is that the Arc Ultra will still support any sub, including the Sub Mini, and all the way from Sub Gen 1 to the Sub 4. But if you want dual sub connectivity, you need either two Gen 3s or two Sub 4s or one of each. Now, level 3. Let's dig really deep into the internal design. Now, beyond external looks and specs, let's dive a little bit into the design of the Sub 4. Internally, there are differences. The actual material and the construction process differs slightly between the Sub 4 and the previous generations. There is a weight saving here over a kilogram or about 3 pounds, right? Now, this is almost entirely saved from the enclosure itself. It is now an injection molding process, and they were able to get the same structural performance from injection molding as the previous CNC process. So things are lighter. Now, if you love heavy, the Sub Gen 2 is at 16 kg, so get one of those. It is also one of the densest subs made by Sonos, so Sub Gen 2. Sub Gen 3 is around down to 13 kg, and now the Sub 4 is below 12 kg. So what has changed other than that? If you look at the exploded view of this, you'll notice a couple of things. Maybe the rendering of the detail is slightly different, but if you look at the port design, it has changed almost completely, right? Now, port tuning is an audio science, and changing the length of the port definitely changes the sound signature. But you don't use the sub on its own, so you have to pair it with something else. I would really love to find out what changes the Sub 4 makes to the sound of the Arc Ultra, and whether it sounds different from the Sub Gen 3 due to this port design change. Now, we have gone through the majority of the changes that were made from the Sub Gen 3 moving the Sub 4. There are some other small little changes. Let me know what else you want to find out. I'll try to make a video of it in future releases. Now, the most important thing today that I want to talk about is how it sounds. In order to objectively tell if there's a difference, we have to test and measure. Well, according to Sonos, both will still go down to as low as 25 Hz, right? And that has been the specification for the Sub Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3, and even the Sub 4 now. Now, that is a lot of low bass. Now, I have the Arc Ultra already set up, right? There are 3 test scenarios I want to go through. the Arc Ultra on its own with the Sound Motion driver, which is a micro sub of sorts, and the Arc Ultra with the Sub Gen 3 and the Arc Ultra with the Sub 4. Now the first chart that I'm going to be pulling up here. Now the Arc Ultra on its own. So this is the green light. It is not bad. We've covered this before in my previous video. The bass goes down to about 50 Hz, not a problem at all, even touching into the 40 Hz range. The Arc Ultra with the Sub Gen 3, which is represented by the overlaid yellow line here. Now this really lifts the bass up. The interaction with the Sub Gen 3 from the Arc Ultra is different from any other soundbar that you are pairing the Sub Gen 3 with, because the crossover has changed for the Arc Ultra. The crossover is about 80 odd Hertz or so. So you'll see that the Sub actually pushes the bass and extends it all the way down to 20 plus Hertz, no problems at all. But there is a slight dip at about 50 Hertz or so, but that is specific to my room and it may not appear the same way in your room. Now the rest of the frequency range, you will see that it is being pushed up. It sounds louder from 100, 200 Hertz upwards. Why is that so? Because the Sub has taken the processing duty, the power, away from the Arc Ultra in those frequencies below 100 Hertz, right? Because the Sub is handling those. So the Arc Ultra is freed up to allocate the power and resources to the other frequency range. So that is an advantage of pairing any soundbars with any subwoofers. Now let's take away the original green light, the Arc Ultra on its own, and replace it with Arc Ultra with Sub 4, and that is the red line here. Now you'll notice that actually there is more bass coming out from the Sub 4. It is noticeably louder, below 100 Hertz or so. Now throughout the bass range, it performs better. So the Sub Gen 3 was already good, right? And the Sub 4, you might not be able to tell the difference readily without testing. The rest of the frequency range, you can see that is also uplifted and there's more focus on the Arc Ultra on the rest of the frequency range, but look at the red line, right? And the dip at about 50 Hz is also elevated a little bit. So all in all, the Arc Ultra, when paired with a Sub 4, sounds better than the Arc Ultra with a Sub Gen 3. So is it worth the upgrade? Well, you make the call yourself, right? So these changes are minimal. You will completely enjoy the system with a Sub Gen 3, but you will also get slightly better sound from a Sub 4. Now, if you are already on a Sub Gen 3, then don't bother moving to the Sub 4. But if you don't have a Sub, then get the Sub 4, unless you get a great savings. And this I already covered in my upfront summary. And this is the way I respect your time in my videos. If you don't have time and you didn't have time in the first place, you don't have to stay all the way to the end for me to rationalize my answer to you. You can get your answer right up front. So if you appreciate that, the least you can do, drop a like, watch the ads if they are placed in my videos, and also subscribe to the channel. I will be covering a lot more content for the Sonos Arc Ultra as well as Sub 4. And let me know in the comments down below if you have any videos that you'd like me to cover, anything you'd like me to cover. I will try my best to put it into my weekly video releases. And I'll see you in one of those videos, or in the meantime, check out something that I've put up here.